In 1888, Sydney decided to throw a party, the biggest party Australia had ever seen. 100 years since the first fleet landed, parades, fireworks, speeches about progress and civilization. And while they were celebrating, 12 people a day were dying from a disease they created themselves. Nobody wanted to talk about that part. Right now, Sydney is one of the most livable cities on Earth. Clean water, modern sewage, public health systems that actually work. But rewind to 1888, and you'd find a city drowning in its own waste, streets that tumbled as open sewers, water so contaminated that just drinking it could kill you, and a government so focused on looking successful that they ignored the bodies piling up in the morgues. This is the story of how Sydney almost destroyed itself while pretending everything was fine. January 26, 1888, Australia Day, or as they called it then, Anniversary Day. Sydney wakes up ready to celebrate 100 years since British settlement. The city's population has exploded to almost 400,000 people. There are plans for grand processions, naval displays, fireworks over the harbor. Politicians are preparing speeches about how far the colony has come, how civilized they've become, how Sydney is now a real city, just like London or Paris. But there's a problem nobody wants to mention during the celebrations. Sydney is dying from the inside out, and they've been ignoring it for years. Let me show you what Sydney actually looked like in 1888. Not the version they showed in the official paintings and celebrations, the real one. The Rocks area, right near where the first fleet landed, is a nightmare. Narrow streets, barely wide enough for a cart, buildings stacked so close together that sunlight never reaches the ground floor, and the smell. Imagine the worst smell you've ever experienced and multiply it by 100. That's the Rocks in summer. There's no proper sewage system, none. Raw sewage flows through open channels in the streets. These channels are supposed to drain into the harbor, but in summer, when it doesn't rain for weeks, they just sit there, festering, breeding disease. People throw their waste wherever is convenient. Chamber pots get emptied out of windows onto the street below. Dead animals rot in alleyways. Slaughterhouses dump blood and guts straight into drains that go nowhere. And when it does rain, everything washes down the hill into the drinking water supply. Yes, the drinking water supply. See, Sydney gets its water from the Botany Swamps, which is exactly what it sounds like, swamps, near Botany Bay. And the problem is that the same drains carrying sewage and waste also eventually make their way to these water sources. The city is literally drinking its own filth. In January 1888, while they're preparing for the Centenary celebrations, typhoid is killing someone every few hours. Dysentery is so common that people just accept it as normal. Babies die from diarrheal diseases at horrifying rates. In some neighborhoods, 1 in 4 children don't make it to their 5th birthday. But talking about any of this during the Centenary would be unpatriotic, would suggest that maybe things aren't going so well, that maybe this grand experiment in colonial civilization has some serious problems. So they don't talk about it. They just keep planning the parade.
The celebration itself is massive. On January 26th, over 300,000 people packed the streets. That's almost the entire population of Sydney, all crammed into the city center at once. There are military marches, school children waving flags, bands playing, speeches going on for hours. The governor gives a speech about progress, about how Sydney has transformed from a convict settlement into a thriving metropolis, about railways and telegraphs and gaslighting, about respectability and order. And while he's talking, just a few streets away, people are dying in rooms filled with their own waste because they can't afford doctors and there are no public hospitals that will take them. The rich live in places like Potts Point and Woollera, up on hills where the breeze keeps the air fresh, where they have private wells or can afford to have water delivered, where sewage flows away from their homes instead of pooling around them. They can pretend the problems don't exist because they don't see them every day. But the working class, the people who actually keep the city running, they're packed into the Rocks, Pyrmont, and Surrey Hills, living in conditions that would be illegal in modern Sydney. sharing outdoor toilets between multiple families, drawing water from wells that are contaminated by those same toilets, working 12-hour days in warehouses and factories, and coming home to rooms that barely fit a bed. Let me describe a typical working-class house in the rocks in 1888. It's 2 rooms, maybe 3 if you're lucky. 1 room for sleeping, 1 for everything else. The walls are thin wood or sometimes just canvas. The roof leaks when it rains. There's no bathroom. You share an outhouse in the courtyard with 6 other families. That outhouse is just a hole in the ground with a wooden seat over it. It gets emptied maybe once a month by night soil men who cart the waste away in barrels. Where does it go? Sometimes it's sold as fertilizer. Sometimes it's just dumped in the harbor. The water comes from a shared tap in the courtyard, if you're lucky. Otherwise, you're carrying buckets from a public fountain blocks away. That water is brown, literally brown. Everyone knows you're supposed to boil it before drinking, but that requires fuel for a fire, which costs money, which many families don't have. So they drink it anyway and hope for the best. And this is normal. This is how hundreds of thousands of people live in one of the most prosperous cities in the British Empire. Dr. Arthur Renwick knows all of this. He's been trying to get the government to do something for years. He's a public health reformer who's actually visited the slums and seen the conditions. He's written reports, given presentations, shown the politicians exactly what's happening. They ignore him because fixing it would be expensive and admitting there's a problem would be embarrassing. See, Sydney has a sewage system. Kind of. It was built in the 1850s and it was inadequate then. By 1888, it's a joke. It only serves a small part of the city, mostly the wealthy areas. Everyone else is still using cesspits and open drains. There have been plans to extend it for decades, but the plans keep getting delayed, budgets cut, priorities shifted. There's always something more important. A new railway line, a fancier government building, something that looks good and makes politicians popular. Meanwhile, the death rate keeps climbing.
Then, in March 1888, 2 months after the centennial celebrations, everything changes. A man named James Joynton Smith dies. He's not some poor laborer from the rocks. He's wealthy, connected. He lives in a nice house in a good neighborhood. The kind of person who shouldn't be dying from diseases associated with poor sanitation. But he does. Typhoid kills him in less than a week. And suddenly, the newspapers care. Because if typhoid can kill a rich man in a nice neighborhood, it can kill anyone. The disease doesn't respect class boundaries. Bad water doesn't care if you're wealthy. Dr. Renwick uses this moment. He goes to the papers with everything he's been trying to tell the government for years. The contaminated water, the failed sewage system, the preventable deaths happening every single day. He has numbers, statistics, maps showing exactly where people are dying and why. The Sydney Morning Herald runs a series of articles, the water question, they call it. They send journalists into the rocks and Pyrmont. The reports are horrifying. Families living in conditions worse than animals. Children covered in sores from waterborne diseases. Old people too weak from dysentery to work, slowly starving. Public outrage builds. How can a city that just celebrated 100 years of progress have people living like this? How can they claim to be civilized when babies are dying from drinking poisoned water? The government finally has to act. Not because they suddenly developed compassion, because they're embarrassed, because the papers won't let it go, because public pressure won't allow them to keep ignoring it. In September 1888, they announce a massive project, a new water supply system bringing clean water from the Nepean River, a complete overhaul of the sewage system, proper underground pipes instead of open drains, treatment facilities instead of dumping waste in the harbor. It will take years, it will cost millions, but they finally admitted that you can't just ignore public health and hope the problems go away. The changes don't happen overnight. The Nepean water scheme takes until 1888 to fully complete. Wait, no, that's wrong. It takes until the late 1990s, almost a decade of construction.
But when it's finished, Sydney's water is actually clean for the first time in the city's history. The sewage system takes even longer. Parts of it are still being built into the early 1900s. But gradually, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, Sydney becomes a place where drinking water won't kill you. The typhoid death rate drops by over 90%. Dysentery becomes rare instead of common. Child mortality rates fall dramatically. People stop accepting dead babies as just something that happens. By 1900, Sydney looks completely different, not just physically, but in how people live. Clean water from taps in every house, proper toilets connected to working sewers, streets that don't smell like open latrines. It's not perfect, but it's livable. And here's the thing that really gets me about this story. It didn't have to be this way. The technology to build proper water and sewage systems existed in 1888. London had already done it, so had Paris. Sydney could have done it decades earlier. They just chose not to. Chose to spend money on things that looked impressive instead of things that would actually save lives. It took a wealthy man dying. It took newspapers forcing the issue. It took public outrage, because apparently caring about poor people dying wasn't enough motivation on its own. Today, Sydney is consistently ranked as one of the most livable cities in the world. Clean water is something people just expect. We turn on a tap and safe drinking water comes out. We flush toilets and the waste disappears into a system that processes it properly. We don't think about it because it works. But in 1888, while Sydney was throwing parties about how advanced and civilized they'd become, people were dying from drinking the water. Kids were growing up stunted and sick from constant disease. Entire neighborhoods lived in conditions that would be considered inhumane today. The transformation took 40 years, from the celebration in 1888 to the 1920s when the system was fully modernized. 2 generations of people fighting for basic public health infrastructure that should have been built from the start. It's worth remembering that progress isn't automatic. It doesn't just happen because time passes. Sydney only got clean water because people demanded it, because doctors like Renwick refused to shut up about it, because eventually the evidence became too obvious to ignore. Subscribe for more stories about cities that had to learn the hard way that you can't just ignore public health and hope everything works out.